Do you ever notice that there's 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour? Do you know where that came from? Babylon. Daniel is the only person in history of any kind who's ever run two empires.
John Lennox explained the book of Daniel in a very wonderful way. Let's get right to it.
I'm going to talk to you about a person who lived in 600 or so BC, so around 25 centuries ago. Why should we be interested? Well, there are several reasons. First of all, the main part of what I'm going to say is about Daniel as a young person and what he experienced essentially as a teenager, let's say between he was 15 and he was 20. He lived in a very narrow culture for the first part of his life. It was a monotheistic culture. It was a Jewish culture. And then suddenly, virtually overnight, he was taken by force many kilometers away to a completely different culture. The language was totally different. The legal system was totally different. The economic system was completely different. And so it goes on. It was a very powerful culture. Daniel was brought up in a God-fearing environment, that's clear. To the end of his life, he maintained devotion to God. It's clear that he prayed and he read his Bible. And that's very good. But there's something else he kept doing. You see, I've lived long enough to notice many people who still read their Bible. They go to church, they say their prayers. But long ago, they have lost the cutting edge of their public witness. They've been silenced by secular culture. Many of them have got scared so that their Christianity is done in private, either in the box that is their house or the box that is their church. And for years, they've never let other people know that they've been a Christian, that they are one. And what amazes me about this man, Daniel, and his three friends, is they did not simply maintain their devotion to God, but they maintained their witness. I'm going to give you the fastest run through Daniel you've ever seen in your lives. So fasten your seatbelts and let's go. Here is a table of contents of the book of Daniel. First of all, the story in the university where he refused the king's food. Do you remember that? Secondly, in chapter 2, there's the story of Nebuchadnezzar's terrifying dream of a great image that came crashing down when a stone hit it. And thirdly, Nebuchadnezzar himself built a golden image. The dream had gone to his head. So he built a golden image and he asked people, including Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to bow to it, and they refused. And then in chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar, and it's about him again, got very proud. And he was walking on the roof of Babylon, and he said, "Isn't this great Babylon that I built for my glory and my majesty?" And in that moment, he was cut down, exactly in fulfillment of a dream of a tree he'd had that was cut down. And he behaved like an animal, and he ate the grass, and his hair grew long, and his nails grew long for 7 years. And then God restored him. But in the next chapter 5, there's another king, Belshazzar, and he made a mockery of God. And he was mocking God at his banquet, Belshazzar's feast, where he brought the vessels from the temple of God and put them on his table. And a hand came out and wrote on the wall. And that night he was killed. And the empire of Babylon fell. Why that happened, we shall see. So there are 5 stories, one after the other, and they come to a huge climax at Belshazzar's feast and the end of the reign of the Babylonians. Now be careful here. Babylon remained the capital city as we move into chapter 6, because now the governing empire is Medo-Persia, but it's the same capital city. So we have a change of empire. It's like, in a way, Hong Kong was ruled by the British for a while, and now it's gone back to the Chinese. It's the same place, but different rulers. That's what happened here. Incidentally, Daniel is the only person in history of any kind who's ever run 2 empires. How do you rise to the top of 2 empires and not only maintain your faith in God, but maintain your witness to God? Well, we shall see. So let's now look at what happens next. This is the story of Daniel refusing to pray to the king, and he's put in the lion's den, and he's released. Then in chapters 7 and 8, we've 2 visions. A vision of 4 animals, and then a vision of 2 animals. In chapter 9, Daniel is studying scripture, and he realizes it's about to be fulfilled, and he prays to God, what's going to happen to my home city of Jerusalem? And God tells him there's going to be a long history before Jerusalem is restored. And then the final 3 chapters are obviously one section, and they lead down into the Greek Empire and ultimately become a prediction, I believe, of the time of the end. Well, that's a fast run through Daniel, isn't it? Now think of it, there are 10 segments to the book. Do they make any sense? Yes, they do. Because you start with an administrative story in Babylon. You then follow with 2 images, one a dream image, one a real image. Then you have 2 kings disciplined. One is disciplined and restored, one is disciplined and not restored. Then you start up again. You have administration in Medo-Persia. And then you have 2 visions of animals. And then you have 2 writings explained. The first one is the Bible, and the second one is what Daniel calls the writing of truth. So you can look at them side by side. This is the kind of structure that appears in secular classical literature sometimes, but it appears in very highly and uniquely developed form in our Bible, and not only in Daniel. And what got me going on this was my friend and mentor, Professor David Gooding, whom some of you in Norway know, who discovered this in Daniel many years ago and wrote a monograph about it for Tyndale Press. Now you notice that there are similarities in the structure, and the first half of the book is the end of Babylonian supremacy. The second half of the book is the time of the end. So it's talking about the far distant future. So it's fascinating. We have a mixture of personal story, of history, of prophecy, and we have a projection of things into the future. Is it really credible or not? So now we're going to have a look at some detail, in case you're fed up with generalities. So we're going to have a look at a little detail. So let me read from the beginning of Daniel 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, who seems to have been the dean of students, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate, and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, just like at Oxford and Cambridge, which is probably where they got it from. They were to be educated for 3 years. At the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself. I very much hope you have. So let's have a look at the first major thing in Daniel's life. It starts seemingly innocently. Nebuchadnezzar came in a certain year, but then it says this, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. What? Come on. If it had been the other way round, and it said the Lord gave Nebuchadnezzar, who was a very powerful monarch with all the latest weapons and a vast army, into the hand of Jehoiakim, who was a very weak king, that would have been very impressive, wouldn't it? But listen, any contemporary historian, and I've talked to them, would say what happened is a typical example of Darwinism in history. You've got a vast great nation, you've got a tiny little nation standing in the way, and they just roll over them and wipe them out. So what's this then? The Lord gave. Why risk looking a fool by saying the Lord's behind it? It's very striking to me. And it's telling us a great deal about Daniel. Here is the first source of this, at that time, young man, his confidence. He passionately believed that there's a God in control of history. Do you? Now listen, there are two histories here. Think about it carefully. Daniel's history at this point had been very painful. He lost his parents. We don't know that he ever saw them again. He'd been pushed into way outside his comfort zone, into a new country, new language, and all the rest of it. And he said the Lord was behind it. You know, I find in life, I don't know about you, it's very easy to say the Lord is behind things when they go well. Isn't it? But to start a book, the Lord was behind this devastating experience that tore me apart emotionally and moved me to another country. The Lord was behind it, and I held on to that. That is very big stuff, folks. Now, we have two levels of history. There's my personal history. And as you sit here tonight, we each of us have a history, and we're in the middle of that history, so to speak. And perhaps you've got huge questions about your history right now, tonight. Is God really behind what's happening to me now? Can I trust him for tomorrow and next week? There's your history. But then there's global history. Things are happening in my country. You may have heard of Brexit. I don't understand them. And many people are fearful of what will happen. And around the world, things are happening. Global moves in technology, global moves in culture, and all the rest of it. And they're way beyond little me. And they seem out of control. are they? Is there really, I mean, let's face it, let's be open. Is it really possible to believe there's a God ultimately in control? This is a hugely important practical question. And Daniel puts it right at the beginning to shake us into thinking about something vitally important. Now, he's a brilliant teacher. You would expect that the question will be answered, and it is answered. It's answered in chapter 9, where Daniel is reading scripture, Jeremiah, and he discovers that he's living at a period nearing the predicted end of the exile. And being a very wise person, when he reads prophecy and scripture, he prays about it. What does this mean, God? Are we going to go back home? Or what's going to happen? God's answer is very complex. But as Daniel prays, he opens his heart and he shows us why he held on to God. I'm not speaking to you as some expert. What I'm doing is trying to share these big things in the hope that in your teens and in your 20s, you make some really big decisions. And I'm praying that this weekend, some of you are going to go out of here radically different in the terms of your commitment to God.
One of the lessons that I learned from the book of Daniel is that he wasn't ashamed of the gospel. He was upfront with what he believed in. He believed in God, and he was never ashamed of it. We live in a world whereby standing up for the truth, saying you believe in God, standing up for Christ, you kind of looked at being weird, being out of fashion, and so many people have become like a Christian in secret. You only profess your Christianity, your love for Christ when you're in church, when you're within your family. You don't shine that light when you're supposed to shine it outside because you're ashamed of what people will say, how people will treat you, because that's the kind of world we live in right now. But I hope we get some encouragement from the book of Daniel that has been explained to us that we should never be ashamed of the gospel. We should profess what we believe in. We should talk about the love of God that we have. We should talk how much we love God. And that is going to set us apart from the rest of the people. And we can also make a difference in our world by doing that. Hope we've been blessed through this. See you guys next time.